Hi, good morning. I'm José Achache. I'm the head of AP Swiss and Altin. Altin is a company in Switzerland. AP Swiss is a program jointly between the Swiss Space Agency and the European Space Agency. The purpose is to support companies to develop applications of satellites or new satellites which would generate new applications. In other words, what I'm interested in is not that much how to build satellite, but what you can do with satellites. Well, my career started as a university professor. I spent 17 years as an academic in Paris. I'm a professor, now retired professor at Paris University. And then I became a bureaucrat. I've been working in national organization and international organization. First, I was chief scientist at the French Bureau of Mine, BRGM. It's the Geological Survey and the Bureau of Mine. And then I started working in space, really. So first I was Deputy Director General of the French Space Agency, CNES. Then I moved to the European Space Agency, ESA, where I was Director of Earth Observation. And that's where I conceived and initiated and built the GMES program, which later became Copernicus and all the Sentinels. I wrote a book called Les Sentinelles de la Terre. So it was about these sentinels and what they were doing. And then later we created an international organization to coordinate Earth observation satellites all over the Earth between the US, China, Japan, France and other countries and Europe. And so I became Secretary General of this organization. That's how I ended in Geneva. Curiosity, and in fact I started space at the university. I established the first space geophysics department. So I was a professor of geophysics, so we were looking at the Earth. And I realized very early that the best way to analyze the Earth was to use satellites and look from above. And I established the first space geophysics department. And so even before I ended my research career, I was already doing space. And then when I moved to running all these organizations, it was always about space, and I wanted to find new things about space, create new programs, and go explore the boundaries of what you could do with space. So creating an Earth observation capability of the size and scope of GMES Copernicus was a real driver, and I loved it. And later on, GEO, this Group on Earth Observation organization I was Secretary General of in Geneva, was to do it not just at the European scale, but at the global scale. And now I'm interested in the commercial applications and the startups, and how can small startups with little means enter into the space business via applications or via new technologies and new space, and compete with Airbus and the Boeing and the big players in this game. This is a fascinating story. Well, it will transform. That's the whole thing about new space. It's transformational. If Elon Musk succeeds in providing cheap, heavy launchers, his target, I understand, is to go down to 10 million for a heavy launcher. That's going to change completely the game. If small startups manage to build CubeSats for $50,000, and that this CubeSat have a real technical capability to realize something, do an observations, provide the telecommunication capabilities, then the capital expenditure barrier disappear. I mean, this capex was a problem for anyone willing to enter space. There was too much to spend before even starting. If that disappears, then it becomes, streamlines the business. So that will clearly transform the way people use space, benefit from space. That part, I think, will not change that much. Well, if we can simplify the satellites for Earth observation, we can probably simplify the space probes and start taking, what we've learned from these new approaches to apply them to interplanetary exploration. But if you're talking about human exploration, it's a huge undertaking, and then the question of reliability, safety, redundancy applies even more, and that will remain. So the procedures, methodology will be still very much like it's been before. If you're talking about automatic probes going to Mars, then yeah, maybe you can think of a CubeSat going to Mars. But the point is, even a CubeSat, it's going to be expensive to send it to Mars. So you want to make sure that it's worth the investment. Therefore, that if you're sending it, it's going to be doing things there. And the more it goes, the more we want samples. We don't want just images. I mean, images of Mars, we know. Detection of water on Mars. I mean, I wrote a paper on water on Mars 20 years ago, published. So when now NASA comes and says, well, we've detected water on Mars, it only excites journalists, but scientists knew for 20 years that there was water, how much water, where it was, how deep, in which form. So it was ice in the ground. So the next steps really are going to be taking samples, analyzing samples. And there are only two ways. Either you take samples, you make the analysis on the site. And therefore you need the capability of the rovers and the robots to actually do the measurements. Or you bring the samples back to Earth. And that again requires pretty heavy power and for liftoff, etc. So exploration will remain a very challenging and an expensive game. But now, people like Bezos, the guy from Amazon, pretends that, he has created this group of billionaires that together will go to asteroids and start mining asteroids. So it's not even exploration, it's space exploitation in that case. Whether this will become a reality, I don't know. Well, afraid, I'm not afraid of much. But one concern I have regarding space is particularly the progress we're making in space observations, and the fact that through New Space, Spacebox Imaging will be providing video from space. satellite resolution, imagery resolution is down to less than 30 centimeters, and we'll probably if we go further down. So the real issue becomes privacy. It's an interesting subject because I was a big advocate of space transparency. I was trying to push back the restrictions applying to the distribution of space data for scientists and for applications, and very often it was linked to restrictions of observations or for whatever reason. So at some point in my career I pushed for transparency, space transparency. Everybody should be allowed to get access to the data. Now with the current and future capability of observing satellites, the real question will become privacy. Privacy, cryptography, so that you can code data. And privacy on your visibility, but also privacy on your data. So I'm really worried with this, the way that all your data, all yourself is made available. I mean, when you open a computer and you start typing, the next ad you will receive is exactly the ad you want to see. And actually, even me, I realized that, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know about that. So they've managed to tailor exactly what my interests are, and this is pretty scary. Yes, I am, almost by construction, but the truth is the current period is not very encouraging. And religion, nationalism, and hatred of anybody who's different, which are the the growing pillars of civilization: nationalism, religion, and hatred of the stranger. This is really, causing me a problem. And we see the disasters every day. Everybody complains about what it does in Syria and Iraq, but the same thing happened in our countries, and people do not seem to object to it as long as it's peaceful. So that really worries me, and I would love to see a world where the religious issues are left aside and we talk about startup, innovations, creations, development. There's a lot of interesting developments. I mean, the economy is changing. We see jobs disappearing in big manufacturing companies and big industries, and now it's restarting through startups, through small innovative companies. That's the new economy, the post-industrial economy, which is in the making, and it's fascinating. The advice, well, it's not an advice, it's a wish. Be clever, be creative, be innovative, but you can't advise people to be these kind of things. You are or you're not. But you should pushing people to dare to try and make their ideas a reality. We really have an environment today, for the reason that I didn't mention, where if you have a good idea, if you have an interesting idea, if you have an original idea, then the means to make it real exist. So it's really a question of will and energy.